So tonight's Torah portion is a continuation from last week's Torah portion. And what did we talk about for our Torah portion last week? What was it about? Those of us that are paying attention? The offerings. What's the Hebrew word for offering? Korban. Korban. It means approach. So we're going to continue that because the Torah portion does continue that as we move forward in the book of Leviticus. So tonight's Torah portion is Tzav. Tzav and means command. Means command. You've heard of the mitzvah, zva, the mitzvah, command. And so that our Torah portion tonight begins in Leviticus chapter 6, verse 1, ends in chapter 8, verse 36. Again, it's an elaboration from last week's Torah portion. And just to briefly recapitulate from last week, we talked about how for many, many years, Pastor Ken has taught us in the Zemach Institute and on Friday nights that Leviticus chapter 1 to 5 provides an allegorical prospect for us to consider our development in our lives as believers. And it actually begins in Leviticus chapter 5, and it works its way back up to Leviticus chapter 1. In other words, most of us, and just to recap, most of us would begin our time, our walk, our time with Jesus, our walk with God, in a place where we would first begin to consider our offenses, trespasses, our trespasses against God, but also against each other. I think, at least when I was born again, initially, that was my focus, that was my concern. Look at all the incredibly bad things I've done to people. Most people in my life. And that was an affront to me, and I had to consider that. I had to come to a position of faith that even though I did some really silly things and offensive things, that the blood of Jesus would cover me even for those things. So that's our trespass, right? So we looked at that last week from Leviticus chapter 5, moving on to Leviticus chapter 1. We saw that there was the sin offering or the sin approach, chatat. And we talked about that being sin as it relates to our relationship with God, as we relate with God, right? So the 10 Commandments, you have 5 that's vertical and 5 that's horizontal. So you can take the 10 Commandments, the mitzvah, and the mitzvot, and you can divide them into vertical, horizontal. Well, that's your trespass and your sin offering. And then we talked about the peace offering, which was really the shalamim, which really deals with our communion, our relationship. We having peace with God, knowing that our sins are covered, and we've dealt with our trespass offering, we've dealt with our asam, our chatat. Now we're in a place to have peace with God. And then we paused for a little while last week to talk about the mincha. It is by no means the most important. I think it's the second most important of the approaches. The second most important. Which is the most important? The Olah. The Olah is the most significant, the most relevant to Jesus on the cross, although Jesus on the cross fulfilled all of the approaches. He was the embodiment of all of the approaches that we find in Leviticus chapter 5 to 1. But we pause for a little while concerning the mincha. We'll come back to that tonight. There's something very important, very relevant to each of us, especially those of us that are in, quote unquote, in ministry, that's tucked away in that whole reality of the mincha that we're going to look at tonight. This is going to be instructional. It's going to be challenging, I think, I hope. And it will cause us to really consider where we are in our position relative to our service to God, which is always very important, isn't it? So we're going to revisit the whole mincha thing tonight. So then the mincha we talked about last week is in fact our work in the kingdom. It's the grain offering. It's called also in the King James the meat offering. If you have a King James, you're going to see the word meat there, as in meat, M-E-A-T. Well, it's called the meat offering, but it's not really a meat offering. There's no meat involved. It's not a blood offering. As we talked about last week, the mincha is the only approach or offering, not sacrifice, we don't like the word sacrifice, that does not involve blood. And I finally got to make the point last Sunday that the issue with no blood in that offering whereas there's blood in all the other offerings, is because, who remembers what my conclusion was? In regards to the mincha, why is there no blood? What's that symbolic of? Because this is all symbolism. It's very allegorical, right? So all of the offerings, with the exception of the mincha, involves a blood offering. The mincha does not. Who remembers my final conclusion? I'm going to start putting you guys to the test. See who's paying attention here. I'm sorry? No, that's true, but that's not the reason. So my conclusion on that is this. In all of the other sacrifices or offerings, approaches, God provides something. God provides. And the blood is what he provides. In the case with the mincha, all of it is provided by us. Every bit of it is provided by us. It's the only one of the approaches that has that nature to it, that element to it, where we provide everything that's offered up. Whereas with the other four, even though we would provide a lamb, the blood is what God provides. Without the shedding of blood, there's no remittance of sin. The life of the flesh is in the blood. Blood is precious to God. The life that he has created is in the blood. So God would provide that there would be blood for the other offerings, but the mincha is different. So we're going to expand on that a little bit tonight. So let's read, perhaps we can read in tonight's Torah portion in regards to the mincha in Leviticus chapter 6, 14 to 18. So we're revisiting the whole reality of the mincha approach, the korban. So 14 to 18. Now this is the law of the grain offering or the meat offering or the mincha. The sons of Aaron shall present it before the Lord in front of the altar. Now this is interesting, the way that the sons of Aaron would present the offering. Let's read it. Then one of them shall lift up from it a handful of fine flour of the grain offering with its oil and all the incense that is on the grain offering. He shall offer it in smoke on the altar, a soothing aroma as its memorial offering to the Lord. So, when the Kohen, the priest, offers it up, it's not baked, not yet. It's loose flour. All of the components that will ultimately be the cake, the bake offering, is loose. So the Kohen, the Kohanim, would scatter the flour, the unleavened flour, the wheat, the ground wheat, which is what flour is, over the fire, and then he will add the incense and the oil and the first fruits, right? Because we read that last week, you bring an offering of your ripened fruits together with this offering. So as we talked about last week, this offering consists of unleavened flour, a cake baked with unleavened bread, oil, which would be olive oil, incense, and ripened fruits. For instance, if it's at this time of the year, what fruit would you have to offer? In the land of Israel, you don't have figs at this time. You don't have much. Dates and olives. That's perhaps all you would have. Maybe not even olives. We don't know. At this time of the year in Israel, the figs are just budding. The fig trees are bare and beginning to put out its leaves and its flowers. The fig trees are bare. But of course, the dates will bear year round. So at this time of the year, you would scramble for some bearing fruit. Grapes are not going to be ready to be picked until August. But if it's August that you're offering this meal offering, you're going to have a lot to offer. You're going to have figs, you're going to have grapes, maybe even olives. And so you would take all of this, the Kohen, the priest would take all of this, and he will cast it onto the fire. And that's how that offering is made. But then what follows is, the rest of it you will take and bake a cake. And let's read it. Again, the priest will just scatter the flour and everything over the fire. What is left of it, Aaron and his sons are to eat. It shall be eaten as unleavened cakes in the holy place. They are to eat it in the court of the tent of meeting. It shall not be baked with leaven. I have given it as their share from my offerings by fire. It is most holy, like the sin offering and the guilt offering. It is a very important offering. There's no blood in it, but it's very important. So the person who's offering this, he brings the flour to the temple. He brings all of this offering to the temple. The priest will offer it up loose, and then they will bake cakes with it and eat it. The priests were to eat it. Interesting. It shall not be baked with leaven. I have given it as their share. Whose share? The share of the Kohen, from my offering by fire. It is most holy, like the sin offering and the guilt offering. Every male among the sons of Aaron may eat it. So who is it for? The benefit of the baked offering, what is not offered on the fire, which is God's portion, right? So what the flour and everything that was cast on the altar was God's offering. The rest of it is not for the person bringing the offering, because in some cases the person bringing the offering will take of the offering. In this case, it's for the Kohen. Interesting. Every male of the sons of Aaron may eat it. It is a permanent ordinance throughout your generations, from the offerings by fire to the Lord. Whoever touches them will become consecrated. I just love that. So that's the meal offering. Let's back up a little bit and read from last week's Torah portion in chapter 2. A little bit from chapter 2. I'm going to read 14 to 16. So this is what we read last week. What we saw this week is sort of different in that you see very clearly that the offering is made in a very peculiar way. Loose on God's altar, just scattered on God's altar, but then baked and taken by the Kohen only. Also, if you bring a grain offering of early ripened things, again, like figs and so on, to the Lord you shall bring fresh heads of grain roasted in fire, grits of new growth, for the grain offering of your early ripened things. You shall then put oil on it and lay incense on it. It is a grain offering. The priest shall offer up in smoke its memorial portion, part of its grits and its oil with all its incense, as an offering by fire to the Lord. So we said that this is, of course, symbolic of our work in the kingdom. So think about it from that perspective. The person who is making the offering, he has a field, he has wheat. Let's say he does not have fruit. He has no access to fruit, but he has neighbors who has fruits, right? Let's say it's the month of August, and he's making this offering. He has wheat. You know, the harvest was a couple months before. He has stored away wheat, and of course no leaven. And he's going to make this offering on behalf of what? What is it symbolic of? His work, his effort. He wants to thank God for his increase. He wants to thank God for the fact that God has blessed him at this time. So he goes before the temple and he offers up a sack of flour, oil. The oil had to be processed, right? You just don't pick an olive and squeeze it and you got oil. A lot of work goes into that, a lot of effort, a lot of determination and resolution, a lot of consistency. You got to work at producing oil. So he puts the oil there and the incense. Incense is not easy to come by. All right, and so you have oil, incense, fruit, flour, and he makes this. He hands this over to the priest. The priest does what he does on the altar. He walks away empty-handed. Every bit of what he is given is for the purpose of an offering before God and an offering to the priest. And he walks away from there knowing that he has expressed his gratitude to God for all that God has given him. So it represents his work, an appreciation, a thanksgiving almost for the work that he has done, and God's offering is offered before him. So for us now, how does that relate to us? ministry, you would say what we do in the kingdom, but it's not just what we do in the kingdom, is it? Is it? It's what we do outside of the kingdom as well. Because our work outside of the kingdom is very much our labor. The Israeli who brought that flour and oil and incense and the first fruits and everything that he brought before the Lord is what he worked for. His occupation even. The means by which he provided for himself and his family is represented in that offering. So can we relate this to perhaps our offerings, our tithes, our offerings? What do you think? Perhaps on some level we can. But this really for us who are a part of the body of Christ, the priesthood, really, this is about our work in the kingdom. Our effort, our yielding of our work in the kingdom. It's about ministry. It can point to your work in general, of course, but I think it's more relegated to what we do in God's kingdom. Now, we'll talk about that in a moment. So this is important. It's important because it's the second of the sequence of offerings. What comes next is by far the most important, which is the Olah. The most significant, the most, I should say, demanding. Because the Olah demands everything of us. The Olah represents a complete and total commitment, where everything is laid before God. And I don't think there are many of us here that are in such a place. And we're moving towards that, right? The Olah, Leviticus chapter 1. But right before the Olah, you come to that place where your ministry, your work in the kingdom is offered up before God. Now, I think in reality, most of us will spend most of our lives as believers endeavoring to make this offering. Most of us would. Unfortunately, some of us will never come to such a place where we're given our talents, our efforts, where we're rendering an offering before God. And why is that? Because I think in Christianity we're conditioned to not believe or to not embrace the reality that we can offer something to God. In Christianity in general, you're encouraged to show up for church, appear, be low maintenance, don't give any trouble, and go about your business. Come back next Sunday, of course, and go through that. That's how Christianity functions. The most important thing they want you to do, the most demanding thing they want of you is to bring people in. Multiply the church, of course. That's where they will put pressure on you. In two places, actually, they'll put pressure on you. Your tithe and beyond, one. And two, be sure that you're bringing people in. You're not effective if you're not bringing people in. Now, in Christianity, that's what you get. But actually, what, as believers, the Bible calls for in us is service in the kingdom. Actual work in God's kingdom. Each of us, not just the ministers, but each of us are to offer this mincha. I think in most of Christianity, especially modern Christianity, pastors and church leaders are not looking forward to people coming in and believing that there's something for them to do. I think most ministers today would avoid that and not lead their congregation to believe that each of them are vital and does have a call and a purpose in the congregation. Why would they avoid that? Because it requires too much from them. You understand? If you're a mega church, right? Let's say you're the pastor of a mega church, and you have about maybe 4 or 5, 6 pastors under you, and you have a congregation of about maybe 10,000 people. You're a good mega church. You're a good average size mega church. The last thing you want is 10,000 people saying, "Give me something to do." I am here by faith, believing that God has something for me to do. Put me to work in the kingdom. I have a call. Here's my call. That's the last thing they want. That's chaos to them. That's mayhem, actually. So most churches will much prefer you show up, 10,000, all 10,000 of you show up. Don't dare confess that you have work to do in this place. You have work to do outside of this place, which is to bring people in so that we can create another mega church associated with us. That's what we get. Well, actually, the truth is, that's why Jesus spoke concerning the Nicolaitans. What do you know about the Nicolaitans that we find in Revelation chapter 2 and 3? Excellent. That's what we see right off the back. You got it. That's what you get right off the bat. He hates their doctrine, he hates their deeds. In both cases, it's relevant to what I'm talking about tonight. Because the word, scholars, Bible scholars, Christian scholars, are perplexed about the Nicolaitans. No one knows who are the Nicolaitans. Who are they? The followers of Nicholas, but we don't have a Nicholas prominent in the first century church at all as a church leader. So who is Nicholas? Who are the Nicolaitans? Huge perplexion. All right, well, it's very simple. The Nicolaitans, it was connected to the sin of Balaam. Remember that? What was Balaam? He was a prophet. What did Balaam try to do? He tried to exercise authority over Israel. You have a bit of a clue there. The Nicolaitans really are a movement in the first century church that exists today where you have the whole clergy laity set up. The Nicolaitans were responsible for the genesis of the clergy laity set up. And let me say this, Jesus hates it. He hates it. Why? Because it's in stark contrast to what he said, the least shall be the greatest. If you want to be called great, become the least. Become the servant of all. In the clergy laity set up, the clergy is great and above all, and it lifted up above the laity. How do I know that's the case? Because of the word Nicolaitan. It's not a word, it's two words. It's a composite word in Greek. Two words, Nicolaitan. Nicolaitan. You can hear the word laity, right? It's there. But what about Nico? What does the word Nico means? I'll let someone research it quickly on their smartphone. What does the word Nico mean in Greek? We're going to see here that God, Jesus, if Jesus hates it, God does. God hates the clergy laity setup because it allows for man to rise above other men and assert themselves in a place of authority like Balaam did. God hates it. It should never exist in God's kingdom. In the church, it should never exist. The word Nico means conquer or to conquer. So the Nicolaitans, they conquered the laity. They rose above. They exalted themselves above the laity. And that's where Jesus said, that's when he said, and that's where he interjected and said, I hate their deeds and I hate their doctrine. Those who will lift themselves up above the laity. Now we as fallen human beings, we attract to that very easily. Don't we? Jesus said it. Don't be like the Gentiles who exalt themselves above each other. Don't let it be that way with you, but the least shall be the greatest. The Gentiles do this. And the church is very Gentile because in the church you have very distinct and prominent hierarchical systems. Those hierarchical systems, that's the sin of the Nicolaitans. And that's very much related to what we're talking about tonight. Because when we work in the kingdom, we have to approach it from that perspective. Now, I'm going to tear open something here in a moment. Hopefully not too awfully bad. Let's talk about talents. Talents. Jesus spoke of talents, right? You know what those talents were? Not what you're talented at, right? Those talents are what? Measures of investment. Monetary investment. Cash, more or less, cash, talents. So let's talk about the talents. Perhaps we go to Matthew chapter 5. Yep, Matthew chapter 5. We all know the parable of the talents fairly well, don't we? One was given 5. The expectation was that he would take what he has been given. He would apply his mincha to it, his effort, his work. And in the process of applying his mincha, he would cause a return of 5 talents. So that one who has been given 5 talents, he's been given much to do. God expects with his mincha that he will provide a return equal to, I think I would say, even beyond what he has been given to invest. What do you think? Would God reject a return that's beyond what he has allotted for that person? Would he reject such a thing? Of course not. So one was given 2 talents, and he was faithful with the 2, and so he's faithful with his mincha, and he returned 2 more to the Lord, and he did well. One was given 1 talent, and he was unfaithful, right? He didn't bring the return expected. He didn't apply himself to the work, to his mincha. You see, you need to see this, that the mincha is all about your application in God's kingdom relative to your talent, what he has given you to do. Of course, at this point, I should stop and say that we should all be comfortable with the prospect that God has given each of us something to do. And it's up to us to discover it. No. Because if we go about trying to discover what it is we're supposed to do, we'll come up with all kinds of abominations. We'll come up with everything that we can possibly come up with, we would. We are only responsible for what he gives us. So what does that tell us? At the beginning of your walk, right around the time of your peace approach, you should be on your face saying, God, what is it I'm going to do? What is it that I am going to do? And you should stay on your face until you have that directive. It is vital. It is important. Don't leave the place of your shalamim. Don't leave the place of your peace approach until you know what it is he has for you. Because I say to you, he has something for each of you, or we're all going to be Nicolaitans. He has for each of you. And it's your responsibility by faith to discover it and to be honest about it. Don't claim something that's not for you. Don't believe that, hey, I want to be such and such, without getting on your face in that place of shalamim, having peace, and discovering by God's intervention, by his revelation, what it is that you should do. Many times it's not what you wanted. Many, many times, in many cases, it's not what you would have chosen for yourself. I know in my case that was certainly it. My call was chosen by God. I had nothing to do with it. I tried to get away from it. I spent a good period of time in denial about it. Couldn't deny it for very much longer. But you must come to that place where you know what God's purpose, what his call is for your life. Once you discover it, you begin to prep that mincha. You begin to work that mincha so that you can make that offering before God. And that's what the talents are all about. Now let's read about what Jesus said about the servant who was not faithful with the talents. Chapter 25, Matthew. We can read 24 to 28. It's incredibly gripping the way Jesus responds to the servant, his servant, who does not bring an increase. It's very, very profound. Let's read it. It's shocking, actually. Verse 24 of chapter 25. And the one also who had received 1 talent came up and said, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you scattered no seed. What is he saying about his Lord, his master? You're a thief. You're oppressive. You're not fair. You're not a fair man. And I was afraid and went away and hid your talent in the ground. See, you have what is yours. Now, how does that relate to us in regards to our opportunities to serve? How does that relate to us? Well, let me share with you what I think. If God gives me a call, put a call on my life, gives me a task, something to do, and it's not something I want to do, I would prefer something that I would choose myself. All right, let's put it in context. If God says to you, I want you to take care of the grounds until further notice. That's your call. But you say, I prefer to be a singer. I prefer to lead worship. And what happens? You're put in a place of a dilemma. There's a pressure. I want to lead worship. That's what I want. But God has called me to work in the grounds, to take care of the lawn, to take care of the property. And what would you do? Is that challenge going to shake you to the point where you would say, maybe that wasn't God after all? Maybe I'll just assign someone the responsibility of doing the lawn. I'll talk someone into doing it. I'll encourage someone to do it because it's a good thing. So I can put my emphasis where I want to be a worship leader. For instance, now you end up becoming a worship leader when God has called you to be keeper of the grounds. That was his word to you, but you become the worship leader that you aspired to be. Be careful of aspirations. They could come from a place of selfish ambition. But you're out here and you're leading worship, but you figure, okay, I'm doing everything right. I'm ministering. This is really good. And you go before God and he reminds you about the lawn that you were called to keep. That's what this talent situation is all about. Now, why did you not embrace the lawn? Because it's hot in summer in Florida. And the grass grows every week. You've got to mow sometimes twice a week. Goodness. In September, I've got to be out there twice a week. I can't do that. That's too much for me. God never called me to do that. God is a just God. He wants to give me what I want. So what are you saying? That God is unjust if in fact he did call you to do the lawn? That's what you're saying. That's what the servant is saying. And he refused to answer. So let's read on. Verse 26. But his master answered and said to him, You wicked, lazy slave, you knew that I reap where I did not sow and gathered where I scattered no seed. Then you ought to have put my money in the bank, and on my arrival I would have received my money back with interest. Therefore, take away the talent from him and give it to the one who has the 10 talents. Isn't that amazing? Let's read some more. For to everyone who has, more shall be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who does not have, even what he does have shall be taken away. Throw out the worthless slave into outer darkness, in that place where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. That's harsh. That's harsh. You know that in verse 30 he's referring to the lake of fire. Gehenna, where the worm does not die and the fire never quenches. Doesn't that seem a little harsh? So maybe the guy with the 1 talent was correct. No, he was not. God takes very seriously the work that he has allotted for you. That's what it's saying. That's what the message of the talents are all about. God takes very, very seriously what he has appointed for you. He expects you to bear fruit. He has invested much into you. Consider in terms of the approaches. What has been provided by God that you can come to that place where you can provide an offering? What has been provided prior to the mincha? Consider that. This will tell you just why this is so important to God. What has been provided in terms of the approaches, the korbanot, the blood offerings has been provided so that you can come to that place of presenting before God your work ministry in the kingdom. And that's why it's that important. It's referring to the blood of the Lamb. Jesus on the cross provided the means by which you can bring a pure and holy offering before God of your work in the kingdom. Let's read Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 5. Let's read what Paul says concerning an unleavened offering. Now remember that this is an unleavened offering. What does that mean for us? In this mincha, there's no leaven. It's a reference to a pure and unadulterated in any way offering. How does that relate to our work in the kingdom? Well, I'm out there doing the lawn without complaining. I'm out there doing the lawn and I'm loving every minute of it. I'm rejoicing in doing the lawn, and I'm not saying, hey, why isn't that guy over there doing the lawn? I'm the only person doing the lawn. If you're out there running the lawnmower and edging and weed whacking, but you're grinding your teeth because not enough people are doing it, your offering is tainted with leaven. You see what I'm saying? It's not a pure offering. If I'm up here leading worship, and I'm angry with the congregation, or I'm fussing at one person or the other, and I'm leading worship, my offering is tainted with leaven. You see that? If I'm up here preaching, and my message is for my own glory, and I'm doing everything to please you, I'm careful about what I say, I'm ignoring the actual voice of the Holy Spirit, I'm compromising, I'm acquiescing to the pressure that you give, then my offering is tainted with leaven. You follow me? I'm not presenting a pure and holy offering. Whatever God has appointed you to do, whatever your talent is, do it with a pure and an honest heart. Being honest about where you are and your call and your appointment. And God will take your offering. You will bring the increase. Your offering will be a soothing aroma before God. Paul here speaking in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, 7 to 8. Clean out the old leaven so that you may be a new lump, pure and holy lump. Clean out the old leaven, again, that you may be a new lump, just as you are in fact unleavened. For Messiah, our Passover, also has been offered or sacrificed. See, he's acknowledging that the believers at Corinth ought to be leaven, a new lump. Were they a new lump? Of course not. This church had some issues. Before I conclude what I was about to read, let's go to verse 1 of chapter 5. This church was not in a good place. Verse 1 of chapter 5, 1 Corinthians chapter 5. It is actually reported that there is immorality among you, and immorality is such a kind as does not exist even among the Gentiles, that someone has his father's wife. That's horrible. But it was being allowed. It was allowed to exist in the church. Now, Paul's address here, he's assuming that that church is leavened, that it's a good offering. Again, that's why he said, clean out the old leaven so that you may be a new lump. Get rid of what's happening. Deal with it. Bring deliverance, bring repentance, restoration. Clean that up and be a new lump. Just as you are in fact unleavened. In other words, he's saying you are supposed to be unleavened. For Messiah, our Passover, also has been offered. Therefore, let us celebrate the feast. What feast is he referring to? Pesach. Pesach, which comes with unleavened bread and also first fruits. I remember many years ago we were approaching Pesach, and I sat one Friday morning with my head in my hand, and I said, there is something wrong in this place. there's something horribly wrong. Jesus, bring to light. By 2 o'clock that Friday, 2 horrible situations were brought to light. And in the space of about 5 years, they were fixed. Because it was Pesach. God wanted to bring to light the leaven that existed in the congregation so that you can begin to address it. And we did. Because we are supposed to be unleavened. The feast that's being referred to here by Paul is obviously Pesach. Not with old leaven, sin, nor with the leaven of malice and wickedness. Now, we need to pause there, because the malice and wickedness factor there can mean many things. Greed, jealousy, envying, factions. Those are the things that causes leaven in a congregation. They ought to not exist when it comes to our feasts. We ought to be clean and pure. Our mincha ought to be without leaven, not tainted with selfishness, selfish ambitions, unjust aspirations. We should be pure. Our leaven should be pure. But with unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. I love that. It's so powerful. Let's read it again. Therefore, let us celebrate the feast not with old leaven, your old sin nature, Fellowship Church, nor with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. You know what sincerity and truth implies? That we are perfectly honest with each other. Sometimes painfully honest, but we're perfectly honest. There's nothing hidden. That's what he's talking about. It's incredible what Paul is saying here, but it does go back to the pure mincha offering that we're reading about tonight in the Torah portion. You see, as I said last week, I as an individual, I have a mincha. I am working on that offering. And we as a congregation also, we have a mincha that we are working to offer before God. He gave us the platform. We have the responsibility to make it happen. He gave us the call, right? The 5 pillars of our call as a congregation. He gave that to us, a commission, our talent. It's up to us to endeavor to present that to him with an increase. Pure and holy, without leaven. Our fruit is added to it. Oil, symbolic of the Holy Spirit, is there. Incense, of course, it's done with prayer. Prayer is a major factor in this offering. And the green, the unleavened green, is symbolic of our faith. That's what the green is, our faith. Because it's our faith that holds the whole thing together. Now, I'm going to bring this to a close now. Let's talk about our attitude towards our mincha, the way we approach it. We have to see it as if we're doing it. We have to approach our mincha as if we're doing it unto God. Unto God. Now, if I'm serving, let's say in the capacity, let's say, of a worship person, I'm playing the saxophone, or let's say someone comes in and they have a talent, not a talent, but a talent, with a violin, for instance, and they want to be added to the worship team. Sure, if you're good and you can bring something to the table, sure. And we pray about it, we feel good about it, and you bring your contribution, a violin. All right. And you're presenting that offering before God. It's added to the congregation. But you're doing it unto God. You have to come to a place, even though you play the violin very well, there's no conceit. There's no pride. There's no me factor involved. You're not off trying to make a big name for yourself because you play a violin at Fellowship Church. Do you understand me? Because then it's not holy unto God. You're not doing selfies of yourself or recording yourself playing the violin, putting it on the internet. Because then it will not be holy unto God. It would be filled with leaven. The leaven of selfishness, the leaven of pride and self. So our attitude concerning our mincha has to be that it's holy unto God. It has to be done with diligence. It has to be done with diligence. Our elbow grease must be added to it. It must. We have to be ever willing to increase our effort in presenting this mincha. When God opens the door for us, we press in, we take more because we want to make that offering. We want it to reproduce. We want the increase of it, don't we? Because He has given it to us to do. What do you say? Someone is given a violin to play in the midst of worship, and they render it well to God. They're not selfish about it. They're not focused on self. They deal well in interacting with the congregation during worship. And they do so well that their talents, which was 2, is rendered back 6. Is God going to say, keep the 4? No, He will embrace it. He'll accept it. If it's done well. If it's an offering that's done without leaven. You see, the violin player is very, very effective. And suddenly, I love Steve's offering because it's a saxophone. He does it in a very unimposing way. Gets no attention to himself. And he works not to have attention given to himself. And he doesn't make videos of himself, posts them on the internet. He doesn't have a website. None of that stuff. No leaven. Just a pure offering. I suspect that on the day he will have more to offer, more of an increase, because his offering is without leaven. With diligence, folks, there is a caveat there that I need to bring to light in regards to diligence. Sometimes we come to a place where we do so much we become controllers. We do so much in the congregation that we believe we have the right more than the other person to be heard. We do so much in the congregation that we believe that we have a right to grumble about people who are not doing. That is leaven stacked upon leaven. That leaven reeks to high heaven. Really does. That we will kick out real quickly. Real quickly. If you come around and you want to serve in the congregation, and you begin to do something, your hands are in the work, but you're complaining about people that are not doing, I'm going to say to you, stop doing. Just stop. We don't need your offering. It has to be pure. Diligence is important, folks. The work in the kingdom must continue to develop in us until God says enough. It must be done in faith. Our work in the kingdom, our mincha, must be done in faith. And faith requires work, because faith without works is dead. It kind of reminds me of the manna and the children of Israel. The manna was given to them, right? You know, Caesar de Mills, I think his name was, who made the movie, the 10 Commandments, right? Caesar D. de Mills. Italian guy, I guess. He's presenting the manna as little puffy things like cotton candy almost. That's it's coming down from heaven, and the women are dancing and just, collecting the manna, take it back to their tents, and everyone eats. Well, that's not the case at all, because what we see in the book of Numbers is entirely different. The manna is a grain that sits on the floor like dew. Stacks of manna on the ground every morning. You don't eat the grain hand to mouth. No, what do? You've got to work it. You've got to grind that manna into a paste, not even a flour. You have to grind it into a paste. That's what we saw in Numbers. And then you bake it. And you eat it. Every day, day in, day out. That's your food. That manna is representative of Jesus himself, folks. I want you to see that. The manna that came from heaven is Jesus. The implication is that it's something we have to work at. The grain in the unleavened bread is our faith. It is something that requires work. But when we plant that grain in the ground, we're expecting a harvest. Faith, the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not yet seen. So we plant the new grain in the ground with the full expectation that come 6 months from now, we're going to have new grain to work with. That's the faith application. So, manna is very much like that. It's something we have to endeavor. It's something we have to work towards. We have to apply our efforts to it. Otherwise, you're not in Jesus. You have no part in him. You're not going to partake of his life if you are not applying. Right? And that's the essence of this, folks. Our work in the kingdom is vital. So here am I. I'm fussing at you concerning your necessary participation in the kingdom. You're not going to get this at the church down the road because they don't really want you to participate. They want you to contribute. Show up. Bring some people in. That's not what I'm asking for. I'm asking that you would fast and pray. Come to that place of peace. Get on your face and discover what it is God has for you. And be real about it. Don't choose something by your own choice. Choose something because he has given it to you. And take it and build it, invest it, and get the increase. Let God have the increase. That's what I'm saying to you. The elders here at Fellowship Church, we're here to facilitate this, to ensure that you have the platform to do such a thing. That's why we're here. If we were to all approach our mincha in this way, our mincha as a congregation will only expand and become more profound. And I can see ourselves getting more involved in Israel, more deeply involved in Israel. I can see ourselves getting more profound in praise and worship. Praise to the point where when we begin to lift up God and Messiah Jesus, the whole place comes alive and the glory of God will show up. Not one person or two people's face will shine, but the entire congregation will shine. When we come to such a place of high, powerful praise and lowly submitted worship before God, that the presence of God will be so powerful as we worship. If we all embrace the reality of our mincha, folks, God's going to lift us in our ministry. We may not grow in numbers. In fact, we may very well diminish in numbers if we go in that direction, but we will be powerful before God because we will offer before him a pure and holy mincha. Maybe then we can consider the Olah. Until then, let's get to work. Shabbat Shalom.